New polls about Israel's response to Hamas reflect a maddening reality. As of today, somehow, the intentional murders of 1,200, including dozens of babies, and the vicious rapes of many women appears to have become a win for Hamas. Many, now even in the U.S., don't believe Hamas was in the wrong. A new Harvard Capps Harris poll shows that a whopping 60% of Americans between 18 and 24 think the October 7th attacks by Hamas were justified. Rape, murder, burning of babies, all justified. And polling from the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs shows that a quarter of American respondents say reports of the sexual assaults against Israeli women by Hamas have been exaggerated. Now, most of the international community is supporting Hamas, or at least ignoring or marginalizing the terror, right? With a 120 to 14 vote in the UN, not condemning Hamas's brutality, but condemning Israel. Any other country with the ability to respond, who had that many of its civilians brutalized, murdered, would respond with a vengeance. In particular, by the way, this country, and rightly so. And yet, liberal and pro-Palestinian groups across this country now supporting the call for intifada against Israel, or translated directly, an armed uprising or rebellion. Now, look, I predicted in the days after the attacks that no matter what Israel's response was, it would come under attack by the very people who are attacking Israel now. So we really need to stop pretending that the real issue is the specifics of Israel's response, or how they're doing it. In reality, the problem is that Israel responded at all. And that's what too few are discussing. You see, it's crystal clear now that Israel is being held to a different standard than any other country in the world. Israel apparently is only allowed to respond if they can do so without any real civilian casualties. And of course, that's literally impossible when Hamas is using civilians as shields, when they're firing rockets from civilian areas, when they're hiding and storing weapons in residential buildings, when they have command centers in hospitals. So the practical options are basically don't retaliate, and don't try to dismantle Hamas, or many civilians are going to die. And because, of course, Israel has responded, many are now rewarding Hamas for the situation they created by committing the most repugnant crimes imaginable. Of course, they knew the response would come. They counted on the international aid groups, European and Arab nations, liberal groups condemning Israel. It worked. They've all fallen for it. Hamas saying more than 22,000 have been killed as of today. Now, in many cases, they're literally making the numbers up. They'll guess how many may have died in an attack on a building. But more importantly, even they admit that they lump together civilian deaths with terrorists. And here's the thing. The same people who accept these casualty numbers as gospel and lump civilians and terrorists together and say 22,000 have been killed are the same people demanding that Israel better separate terrorists from civilians. But see, of course, the reason it's so difficult to do it and to assess the numbers is because Hamas makes sure to keep it that way. They want everyone to view the terrorists and the civilians together, both as targets and in casualty counts. They're grand manipulators. Just continues to amaze me how many keep falling for it. Again, we knew it would happen. I told you here it would happen. That doesn't make it any more acceptable. Are you going to tell me that if there were, I don't know, let's say 5,000 killed instead of what they claim are 22,000, are you going to tell me that the groups who are protesting Israel would be supporting them? They'd be just condemning the Hamas atrocities? Of course they wouldn't. What if it was 3,000, 2,000, or less? The reality is, if there were any civilians still dying now during any Israeli response, nothing would be different. It is shocking how long it's taken much of the international community and finally the liberal media to even recognize that the gender-based targeted attacks by Hamas were real. They happened. But even now, Hamas has succeeded in instilling doubt about that. Somehow, so many keep deflecting or just defending Hamas. I often get asked the following: Dan, how many Gazan civilians have to die to make it proportional? They say 1,200 Israeli deaths died. So if 22,000 Palestinians die, how is that a proportional response? I ask the question back. What number would be okay? If they killed 5,000, 3,000, 1,000? Are you going to actually tell me you would have then been okay with Israel's response? Of course not. It's a useless question. The most significant reality is that Israel does not benefit by the death of civilians. If they did, they would not warn civilians where to go to avoid the next bombing. They would flatten neighborhoods instead of buildings, or going door to door, which is very perilous for Israeli soldiers. You can argue that the IDF needs to try to be even more careful about civilians. I've made the same point in certain contexts. And you could have made the same argument, by the way, about the U.S. response in Afghanistan. But in the end, this is a war. It's a war created by Hamas. And if civilians die in war, most importantly, this is exactly how Hamas wants it. Civilian deaths help their cause, and any deaths in Gaza seem to hurt Israel's. The evidence of that is now clear in how so many around the world have responded. They won't admit it, but they're letting Hamas win. Then there are those who say, yes, Hamas is bad, but Israel is doing this or that. Hamas created this and bet that only Israel would be held to account, not them. People, for example, who wanted to sound even-handed, demand that Hamas release all the hostages and that Israel stop its incursion, like the 17 anonymous members of the Biden administration today, demanding in a letter that President Biden call for a ceasefire and investigate Israel. Oh, and also call for Hamas to release the hostages and that Israel release a lot of prisoners, too, acting as if hostages and prisoners are the same thing. They know they are really only talking to Israel. Hamas is unaccountable. They won't just release the hostages. The world just seems all too willing to turn a blind eye to that. This is about right and wrong. Israel's response by any other nation would be considered perilous, but righteous. Because it's Israel, they're immediately the aggressors, they're the bad guys, and have been from the moment of the attack on them. And that isn't just anti-Semitism, as some Jews claim. Yes, there's definitely anti-Semitism around the world. It's a factor. But a lot of it here in the United States is just ignorance and a complete unwillingness or inability to answer the question, what else do you think Israel should have done? What would you do if this happened to your country, to your citizens? So, look, let's criticize the IDF if and when they deserve it. But big picture, please, spare me the self-righteous condemnation of Israel more broadly by claiming this is about the number of civilians who have died. Of course it isn't. The same people on MSNBC and in the Arab world who blamed Israel as soon as the attack occurred would be blaming Israel today, no matter what the death count was. Let me be clear. Civilian deaths must matter. A lot. And no one knows that better than Hamas. And that's why they're trying to guarantee as many as they possibly can. The rest of us, particularly those of us in the media, shouldn't be falling for that ruse. Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your cable provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.